Good evening. I am Twitch Cuvier, your zomblific host for this evening's horrific episode of Reel to Reel.
Welcome to this spectacular Halloween edition of Reel to Reel. I'm Richard Crouse, and we're here at the Rue Morgue Magazine mansion located on Queen Street East in Toronto. Joining me today are Adel van Belkom, one of Canada's leading horror writers, and Rod Gudiño, editor of North America's best horror magazine, Rue Morgue.
Why, baby? Why? Why?
I couldn't sleep. Who is she, Rachel?
That was a clip from The Ring, a recent horror movie that's made a lot of money at the box office. But guys, I gotta tell you, I didn't find it particularly scary. And I wonder why horror movies aren't as scary as they used to be, to my mind, and if it's me that's changed or if it's the movies that's changed.
Years ago, I was at a convention which Robert Bloch, the author of Psycho, was a guest. And he said something that I remember very, very clearly. He said that television had changed the audience and made it more sophisticated. And if you think that the level of reality and sophistication that we get on a show like Law & Order or NYPD Blue, it's a far cry from what we saw in the 1930s. So what was scary in the 1930s doesn't cut it anymore, and we need more today than we did back then.
So what happens though? I mean, you just can't keep giving us more and more and more. You've got to hit a wall at some point, don't you think?
Well, I think it's all about reinventing the wheel to a certain extent. I mean, you know, the Blair Witch Project, you know, we come back to that a lot, which is a movie that was that scared a lot of people and didn't have any monster, didn't have any traditional scare, you know, special effects or things that normally scare people. It's just a great story, something that happened in your mind. If you can kind of reinvent the wheel a little bit, I think you're on good ground.
It's exactly what happens in the horror genre, reinventing the wheel. If you ever read Roger Ebert's review of the original Night of the Living Dead, he asks the question, what is going to be the next thing for people who say this isn't enough? Right. And every generation, somebody does reinvent the wheel. You know, you have The Exorcist come out, or then you have Nightmare on Elm Street come out, and that redefines it. Then you have the Blair Witch Project, and that's the thing about horror. We go along for a little while, and then someone has a really good new idea, and it changes everything.
Well, because essentially, we're scared by the same things now that we were scared by 200 or 300 years ago. You know, the same elements are there. It's about how they're presented, I guess.
Yeah, also, but there's also some social sort of pressure points that happen time and again. You know, in the 50s, McCarthyism and the Red Scare, and you know, in the 70s with the realism, the serial killers and so forth. If you can, I think, tap into one of those things, one of the social phobias of the time, I think definitely, you know, you'll...
Giant ants, for instance, you know, that kind of thing. Yeah. So I guess it isn't me. Oh no, it is me that's changed, and not the movies so much.
Well, have you changed? How old are you now? And you remember fondly the movies that you saw 20 years ago, and they scared the hell out of you then. You watch them now and say, yeah, it sort of pushes the same buttons, but not all of them, or not as well as it did when I was a lot younger.
Well, I find, though, that, you know, there's a difference between scary and gross. You know, like, lots of movies can gross me out. Lots of movies make me go, ooh, man, I wish I hadn't have seen that. But I don't find it particularly scary.
Well, there was a whole movement in the horror genre in the 80s, you know, splatterpunk. And that was part and parcel of the films of the Friday the 13th and their ilk. And we went through it all, you know. So we saw it and we got over it, and now we're back to the emotional resonance in horror.
That's definitely true. I mean, I don't think you can scare it twice, or at least you can't scare the same way again. I mean, The Exorcist, which is a pretty amazing movie that had a lot of really jarring visuals. Nowadays, you get it on TV. And I think part of the reason for that is because we've already seen it. We've already been scared, and we kind of got over it. We got past it. So, yeah, definitely fear sort of only works once, or only works once really well. That's probably why you don't go into a haunted house at a theme park twice in one night. You do it once a year because you forget, right? What's there, right?
You need to tell me. You must go at once. Leave this ship while you still can. Katie, what? What is it? Katie!
That was a clip from Ghost Ship starring Juliana Margulies, who you're probably familiar with from ER. Again, not particularly scary, but it has some elements in it that are typical to all horror movies. And I'm just wondering what you guys think has to be in a horror movie in order for it to be scary.
Well, what you have to have in a successful horror movie, you have to have the emotional context, and you need character development. If you watch The Sixth Sense, 45 minutes of that film is introducing us to the child and his mother, and we get into his life, and then when he gets scared, we feel not because we're fearing the ghosts or what he's seeing, we're fearing for him and thinking, my God, an 8-year-old boy has to go through that. That's so terrible. And that's where the horror lies, not necessarily in the bloody ghosts and these terrible things he's seeing, but the emotional, scarring that's going on inside his mind and body.
Absolutely. I think character development in the story. In terms of the monster, though, a lot of these movies have a boogeyman of some sort or a monster of some sort, and I think the less developed that monster is, in other words, the less humanized the monster is probably the greater it will scare people. With Ring, actually going back to Ring a little bit, they really explained the backstory behind this little girl, and I think they took a lot away from the movie by doing so.
I think you're right on the less monster is better. People don't think of it as a horror movie, but one of my favorite films, The Terminator, is a very scary sort of monster movie. And until the last half hour, you don't see it at all. You see the effect of it, you see the damage it can do, you can see how resilient it is, but you don't actually see the monster until they say, okay, here's the monster, and let's see it. And we really get to see it with its skin torn off and this, armature and everything. And wow, that looks great. So a lot of times in horror, less is more as far as monsters go. But you can never, I don't think, overdo it as far as character development goes.
Well, one of the creepiest movies that I've ever seen, and it stayed with me forever, and I just saw it again recently, is Freaks, the Todd Browning, I think. Because you've got this collection of sideshow characters, and they're real, which is one thing. In the movie, they actually used real sideshow characters. But the whole scene where they're singing "One of Us," and to sort of induct the one of the characters into their little army of sideshow freaks is absolutely terrifying and stays with me forever. And I think it's because you know that they're real. They're not monsters so much, but you know that that those people are authentic and that they are real.
Well, this whole realism thing, I think, is kind of like the trump card of horror movies. If you have a very scary story, how much scarier is it if it's real? It actually happened.
Well, we talk about the success of the Blair Witch Project. Supposedly it's actual documented or documentary type tape and footage found, and that sort of makes it real. I had some problems with that film. I mean, if you're crossing over a river 3 times and you're lost, well, you follow the river and eventually you find civilization. But I thought, that was really cool, the way it was a documentary, real, very real, and still.
And there were a lot of people who believed it. I mean, I had to tell a few people it didn't actually happen.
Well, one of the scariest, again, another scary movie that isn't a horror movie is In Cold Blood, which based on the book by Truman Capote, because, again, this is the evil that men actually do to people. Werewolves don't scare me so much because I'm fairly convinced I'm never going to bump into one. But In Cold Blood, the story of 2 people who just murder a family for no reason, that's scary.
Reel to Reel is giving you the chance to win Halloween prizes, including gift packs from Rue Morgue Magazine. Contestants must correctly answer knowledge testing questions on Canadian horror posted on Reel to Reel's website.
I wanted to, in this segment, have a look at Canadian horror films because I don't think people realize what a grand tradition of really good horror movies that we have coming out of this country.
They'd be surprised to know that a lot of these really great movies like Black Christmas, some would call the first slasher movie and the inspiration for Halloween, Canadians, we could talk about that. The Americans are just going to disregard it. Wasn't that some Canadian film, you know?
But it's a pretty good little, it's a scary little
It
movie.
is an excellent film, and the thing about it is, and we talked about reality,
Yeah.
everything is logical in that. And, you know, one thing follows the next. There's no big surprises or anything that makes you shake your head, and everything is quite real. I loved in that film that when they're outside, you could see the breath of the people, and you know it's cold, and that just added an element that, yes, they're outside and it's freezing cold, and we don't have to pretend it is.
Yeah, this isn't a sound stage. Yeah.
There's a lot more more recent films. Mary Herron's films, American Psycho, of course, and Blood and Donuts, which have...
Ginger Snaps, I thought was a really good film.
An excellent, excellent film. I watched that and I said, that's exactly the way a werewolf movie should be. It's not a romantic thing. It's not a cool thing to become a werewolf. You know, you've seen Teen Wolf and Teen Wolf 2. It's not cool. It's actually quite horrific.
Well, see, what I really liked about that film is that the way it treated adolescence, because you've got these two teenage girls who are fighting against the idea of becoming werewolves. They're doing battle with it, and they're strong characters. They're not the victims, which in most horror films or slasher films, the teenage girls are always the first ones to go.
There's not the classic Jamie Lee Curtis final victim in
Yeah,
this
right,
one.
right.
They're sort of all victims, you
Yeah.
know, because this thing is really a curse.
The unfortunate thing, though, is that when you label a film Canadian, you know what happens to it, especially a horror movie. I'm not too sure that viewers really trust that for whatever reason.
Well, it used to be a Canadian film meant that the boom was going to be in half the shots, right? The boom mic was going to be in half the shots. That's not true anymore.
No.
I mean, movies don't have to be made in California. They don't have to be made in America anymore to be really good. So I think a lot of Canadian films are going to be doing a little bit better in the future, and who knows, we might have something brand new coming out of this country.
Absolutely.
Well, in terms of horror films, Ginger Snaps, they're making parts 2 and 3 right now, which I think is really great. So it makes me wonder, what's the future of horror movies? We've got Ginger Snaps 2 and 3. We already know about that. What else is?
I think a lot of filmmakers are trying to get back to the sort of gritty kind of filmmaking from the early 70s. I think they're trying to revisit ideas like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Deliverance. Stan Winston's new movie Wrong Turn is certainly along those lines. Rob Zombie's House of a Thousand Corpses, which has been sort of in limbo for about a year, is along those lines. And you know, people are trying to get back to more visceral thrills, I think, but not CGI laden, more realism, more you know, urban horror.
The thing about the future of horror is it's unpredictable. You could say, well, this is going to be the next big trend, but then there's going to be some 25-year-old come along and blow everybody out of the water because he's got this vision that no one could have thought of, and it's like so brand new, and then we're going to follow along until someone says, I'm tired of that, here's something new. And it's always like that in the horror genre. It makes it so vital, as in a lot of vitality.